Ray Lee with Speedboat Magazine here with another episode of the Boats and Bros podcast. And here, as always, is my bro, Myrick Coil. And we have a world famous Fred Kiekhaefer, formerly of Mercury Racing, with us today. What's up, Fred? How are you?
Well, I used to be kind of a big deal, and now I'm just another has-been from the marine industry.
That's a great story.
I wouldn't think that.
It's good to be with you.
Where are you today, Fred?
I'm in Castle Pines, just south of Denver, my favorite haunting grounds.
That's home for you.
Yes, and just back from a couple of days of skiing with some friends. So I'm worn out and happy.
Yeah. It's been about a year since I went out to Breck and went skiing, but man, that was my first time in Colorado skiing. It was an awesome deal.
It ruins you forever.
Yeah.
That's why I moved here. I started skiing out here. I started skiing out here when I was a youngster in college, and I was voted by my fraternity to be least likely to ever come back for a second ski trip. And I haven't missed a season in over 55 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
I love it.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Fred's an insane skier. Is like pro level, off the charts good.
Well, that's a little over optimistic, but
so let's get into it. Fred, your father, of course, was the famous Carl Kiekhaefer, and who essentially started Mercury Racing. Tell us about the history of your dad.
Oh, well, my dad had an interesting background. His whole life he was driven, but he was a farm boy. All of my grandparents were farmers, but my dad got real sick of that lifestyle. He didn't like fixing farm machinery and harvesting hay and feeding cow manure out of the stalls, and he just said, I got to do something else. So he went into electrical engineering school, which he didn't finish. A few years ago, I actually came across some of his report cards. And he wasn't that good a student, but he was driven. And he actually was a hell of a salesman, too, because he talked my grandfather into mortgaging the farm to enable him to buy a factory. And it just happened that factory was a defunct outboard motor plant that had been selling engines to one of the then big box stores, Montgomery Ward. And to raise working capital.
What was the name of that company? Outboard.
It sold under it was Thor. Thor was the brand there was another brand, Wizard or something like that he sold to Ward. But he was going to go into the magnetic clutch and separator business because his background, a little bit of it, was electrical engineering. And the farm needed a way to get all of the barbed wire and things out of the cattle feed. So he was going to build magnetic clutches and separators. When he got there, this factory was full of a bunch of rejected inventory. So he talked Ward into saying, well, if I fix it up for you and it works, will you take it off my hands? So I got working capital. They said, yeah. And they worked so well that they ordered more of them, and he was in the outboard business. He never did make a magnetic separator. That was 1939. It was what a hell of a start, because he never ever anticipated being in the outboard business. And then things got really dicey. He was starting to make engines. Things were pretty good. They ordered more and more. And then World War II denied the use of aluminum to any non-essential products, and recreational engines for boating were considered non-essential. So essentially 3 years in, he was out of business.
Yeah, because everything on an outboard is aluminum.
Well, back then there was a lot of stamped steel too. They were really, really bad engines, but he made them work at least better than they did before. But the aluminum suspension really put him out of business, and I never realized what a short time horizon that was. I mean, he was 1939 to early 1940s, and bang, he's done. So he's out trying to figure out, well, what can I do to keep my factory and my employees doing something? And he was out. He had heard about a company that was looking to make tail wheels for tail dragger airplanes. So he went out to hear, this is all stories he related to me when I was in college. He went out to hear what he might do to supply tail wheels. Well, this guy was on the telephone going, "You need what? You need engines for what?" And my dad was taking notes, and he got him walked out of the meeting and went to the guy was talking to build him engines for chainsaws. So he got mated up with Disson, who made the chain and the drive mechanism for the saw part of it, and he made the engines. And they worked really well. And then he started looking for other applications for the military. And then he beat out some competitors. He learned that there was a need for target drone engines. So he had a gift for rapid prototyping in the days before that was even a concept. And he built prototypes, got them accepted, and got a contract to make target drone engines. And then those were successful. He always used to say, that was the best product I ever had. Because if it failed, the gunner took credit. And there was no warranty.
Yeah.
But then he used the same engine to make pumps. So they could evacuate a sinking ship quickly with a high-speed engine that pumped all kinds of water. So he made chainsaws, he made pumps, he made air compressor driven by motors, because in those days they jacked up the bombers with big bladders underneath the wings. That was how they jacked them up to change the tires. So he made all kinds of engine applications for World War II.
That's wild.
When the war ended, everybody wanted to go do things that were fun, and outboard motor business took off as a recreational product.
Yeah, I had read Wikipedia on him, and I had seen that there was a lot of patents that he had.
Yeah, he was very creative, and a lot of his ideas were very good. I learned a lot of things from watching him work on that kind of stuff. I was just a little kid, right after the war is when I was born. I was born in 1947, and I used to go to his office and play around on Mylar on the drawing boards, and I'd look around the office, and there was all kinds of airplane engines for these little target drones and pumps and everything. I still have a lot of that I captured when he passed away, so it didn't end up in the trash bin. And I've got a friend of mine who's got a warehouse. He's got a warehouse full of all memorabilia from the war years all the way up through the products that he did at Mercury. So it's kind of it's an interesting background, and I feel very fortunate to have been born, because when you think about it, here we are. Both of my parents survived World War II. My mom agreed to she had two daughters already, Helen and Anita, and agreed to have another baby because my dad always wanted a boy, which my sisters pissed and moaned about their whole lives. And he finally got a boy, and then he didn't like the one he got, I guess, because he sure gave me a hard time.
Wanted perfection.
Is that right? He was pretty hard on you, Fred?
Oh, he was hard. He was hard on just about everybody. I mean, Jeff Rodingen wrote the book Iron Fist about my dad, and it's pretty open about a lot of the difficulties that people had working for him, and it was hard being his employee. It was harder still being his son. The expectation was always much greater than you would ever be able to satisfy. In fact, I can only remember one time in my entire life that I got a compliment from my father.
Really? What was that?
I was in the two-stroke lab working on snowmobile engines in the early 70s, and I was in there. I had come up with a mechanism to work on transfer ports for loop-charged two-strokes. And I was in there on a Saturday night. I had made little blocks that I could put putty in and then hand sand and then look at the air profile across the top of the piston. So I was in there grinding on one of these things, and he walked into the lab. His compliment was a smile, turned around and walked out. He never said a word, but I took that as a compliment. And the damned engines were good. We were making about 100 horsepower out of an 800cc triple cylinder free air racing motor for snowmobiles.
Wow.
So when he got out of Mercury, he was a hard guy to manage. I'm sure Brunswick in those, because he sold to Brunswick in the 60s. And he made it all the way to 1970 before they tried to kick him upstairs. And he didn't go quietly, but he left and started a snowmobile engine business because that was the only place that he had a no non-compete clause. So he jumped into it with both feet, and I was right out of engineering graduate school, and I had focused on IC engine design. So my first 3 engines were snowmobile engines. The first one I wasn't proud of. I was a summer intern working at Mercury before my dad quit, and I got charged to make the first snowmobile engine for what came to be known as the lead sled. You don't develop a snowmobile on a cornfield with 2 inches of snow, because they were heavy, they were reasonably fast as long as there was not too much snow on the ground. But as soon as there was snow, or as soon as you hit a ditch, they wanted to roll over. We used to joke they'd fall over on their own in a stiff breeze.
And what
They were top heavy.
what brand of snowmobile?
Well, they were called Mercury, and Mercury was in the snowmobile business for a while. And then they finally redesigned the snowmobile after my dad was gone, and then they put some pretty decent engines in them. And they had some very competitive sleds before they decided they were never going to make any money, and they quit. So we were in the snowmobile engine business. Out of engineering school, I joined my dad and started working on snowmobile engines for Kiekhaefer Aeromarine Motors. Well, that was going well. We had a nice big contract with Boland's. Actually, it wasn't a contract. It was a handshake. Turned out to be a problem because Boland's parent, Food Machinery Corporation, FMC, they got a new chairman, and the new chairman killed the snowmobile business. And there we were sitting with a lot of engines and no customer. So I was working on the next gen. I'd already done the first Aeromarine engine, and I was working on the inverted V-twin, which was a liquid-cooled snowmobile engine that was really pretty advanced technology. That was before anybody was liquid-cooled. And it was very, very smooth little engine. I mean, you could sit there at $6,000 and balance a quarter on the crankshaft on the case. And it was unbelievably good engine. But we never found a customer. We almost had one with Bombardier. They wanted the engine. I spent about a month in Valcourt cold testing the engine and making sure that everything worked right. And they were quite excited about it. But that was the days of Jimmy Carter and the first horrific interest charges, and the deal fell apart because the cost of money was just crazy. So that fell apart, and I left, and I went off to do other things. And my dad stuck around, and he was making the Champion Maker offshore racing engines. One of the projects that I did before I left my dad's employ was the manifold on that engine. And that's what went on to win quite a few World Offshore Championships back in those days. Fun stuff.
Fred,
that's cool.
With as tough as he was on you growing up as a youth, what made you decide to kind of follow in his footsteps and work alongside him?
Well, that's a really good question. First of all, I learn a lot of very positive things through negative inputs because my dad was always creative. Every time I tried to touch an engine, the mechanics and engineers would go nuts and think, my God, he's got something that doesn't work. It's going to look bad. So they'd take it away from me. So I never got to work on anything, except I did have some good mentors at Lake X when I was in high school. I worked summers at Lake X. I tested boats. And then when race times came around, I had good mentors that taught me how to rig race boats. So I rigged quite a few boats, hoping I would get to race them, only to have my dad take them away and give them to Dave Craig at Skyway Marine, and he'd go off and win the damn class with a boat that I rigged and was supposed to race. And that was very frustrating, but I loved it. I had a passion for it. I mean, I always had a boat at my disposal as a kid. I had my little flying flivver with my 6-horse Mercury on it. And then I graduated to a Crosby with a 25 and then on up into a Tri-Cat with a 70 horse on it. And my dad saw me tail walk it, so he took it away. So anyway, I had a lot of early exposure to the boats, and I really enjoyed it. And then finally, I just refused to rig a boat one time at the lake, and my dad, "Oh, what are you losing interest?" And I said, "Well, I'm just tired of rigging race boats." And he says, "Well, you rig a race boat, and you get in a boat, and you can go to a race." And I said, "Oh, baloney! You're not going." Oh, that counter logic finally got me in a race boat with Bill Saroy, and we won a couple of boat races together.
Nice.
And it was a good time. But I had one of the races that ran to the Bahamas and back in 2 days. So you went over one day, came back the next. Going over, crossing the Gulf Stream is rougher than can be. And we hit one so hard, I went down through the bolster onto the floor.
Wow.
And I thought, thank God Bill Saroy's driving. And I looked over and he was right next to me on the floor. There was nobody driving.
Yeah. I'll just
What
bury it in
hull
the
and what
bottom.
power?
That was a Bertram Nautek. It was 30-footer. It had a couple of Mercruisers. They were probably, I'm going to guess they were around 400 horsepower. There wasn't a lot of power back then. But the boat ran good. It was probably the fastest boat in the circuit that season. And we got hammered pretty hard on the way over, and it was a little smoother on the way back. But we were all fueled up and ready to go. We had Odell Lewis, who was another factory driver, just in front of us. We kept him within shooting distance because we knew we were faster. So we figured when we got back to the intercoastal, we would then trim it out and pass him just before the finish line. Except when we went to trim it out, nothing happened because the pumps had broken off the transom. We're laying in the bilge. So we finished second.
And did you race did you go to Bimini?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, Freeport.
Okay, Freeport.
Yeah. That was that's when I learned that boat racing was fun, but not for me. I'm going to be on the pencil end of the business and design stuff for racing instead. And then when my dad left Brunswick and Mercury, then we got into the snowmobile side of things. And then when we had our reduction in staff because we lost the customer, I resigned. And I took that opportunity to go to business school because I had learned in my interactions with the people at Bombardier, we were talking about, finance and how can we do this acquisition and all this kind of thing. And my head was kind of spinning because I was an engineer. Half the stuff they were talking about, I didn't understand. And I said, I got a hole I need to fill. So I went back to business school at Northwestern and got an MBA. And I learned a lot about what I didn't know and realized that life is full of holes you got to fill. Hopefully never again on the Gulf Stream because that hole was a deep one.
Yeah. That's cool. And it had to be awesome. I mean, even though your dad was hard on you, but to be at Lake X testing boats in high school, I mean, that would have been a dream for me to, no matter what.
That was fun for the first 3 days. And then those 8-hour days got to be real low, especially if you did something that wasn't nice. Then you got the real slow boat. You'd have a 6 horsepower engine on a 16-foot aluminum boat going 22 miles an hour around that lake for hour after hour after hour after hour, sweating in the hot Florida sun. I learned that I could fill a bucket with ice cubes because they had all these tail cones from fuel tanks on fighter jets. My dad bought a bunch of them for surplus to mark the course we had to drive around. So I got really good at hitting the cones with my ice cubes. It was just
as you went by.
Yeah, as I went by, bing, and another one, bing.
So for those that don't know, tell us about the history of Lake X and what it is and how it came to be.
Lake X is a test site still used to this day by Mercury. There's an in and out of there, but I can go back to that in a minute. My dad was looking for a place where he could test engines away from the prying eyes of competitors. he was very paranoid about keeping new products secret, and he always thought there were spies trying to see what he was doing. And some of the times he was right. We actually encountered one. Well, that's another. But there were people at Mercury spying on my dad.
Yeah.
But or Outboard Marine, I should say, spying on Mercury when Mercury was still my dad's company.
OMC.
And he was flying around Florida looking for a place that was isolated, and he found this Lake Conlin in the central part of Florida, and he was able to buy the land, all but one little parcel that was owned by a hunting club, and they wouldn't sell. Eventually, he managed to buy it anyway, and then he owned the property all the way around. But it was a big lake. The property itself was essentially a rectangle, 5 miles on one side, 4 miles on the other, and so it was a 20-mile loop practically. And if I was really bad, I didn't get to drive the slow boats. I had to drive the compactor around the lake because he built a perimeter road. And that road was there to keep the spies from. I mean, he was really paranoid about keeping things quiet. It worked pretty well for him. But we did have poachers come in to try to shoot alligators, and every once in a while we'd catch a fisherman trying to wet a line, and there was no fishing allowed except for my mom who had permission.
The last time I was there was some giant deer. I mean, the racks on the deer were huge when I was there. It's probably been 2 or 3 years ago, but when we were putting the 300R into testing for the stock class. But man, I was dying to go fishing. I was dying to do anything other than drive a boat around, because I get to do that a lot. I wanted to take advantage of the other stuff.
Yeah, the lake had a lot of very interesting wildlife. There were wild boar everywhere. And,
really?
It was fair game. Every once in a while, we'd have somebody come in and kill them back because there were just so many.
Yeah,
and a lot of deer, a lot of waterfowl, of course, big bass, a lot of good fishing out there. And I would take my mom fishing, and I broke the rules. I wet a line as well, but I'm not much of a fisherman. I'd rather go fast than go slow. So,
are you surprised? Are you surprised at the mystique that the Lake X has grown into in the?
Well, it's been there a long time. I mean, I'm trying to remember when he actually bought the property. I think it was late 50s, because it was, I think, 57. I think it was 1957 when they did the endurance run. Mercury had a reputation back in the 50s of it's fast, but it won't last. And all the outboard marine dealers loved to say that. So my dad said, bullshit, I'm going to prove him wrong. He loaded up a couple of boats with the I think it was the Mark 75 on a Renault runabout. I probably just a teenager at that point, 13 or 14 years old. And I used to go to the lake just to hang out. And I had my .22 rifle. I used to pluck bottles and cans in the dump just for amusement. And I got to watch a lot of that stuff happen. And that was a very interesting time, because he ran the distance of twice around the world with 2 boats. And it was authenticated by USAC, because my dad was then involved with stock cars, so he knew the officials from the United States Auto Club. So the USAC people validated the actual mileage, and that sort of set the tone. And these boats never stopped. We had tanker boats that rolled up next to them. They refueled underway.
That's cool.
It was pretty neat, and I got to ride it a lot of times. I'd hop in the fuel boat, go around with them while they did the fueling. And of course, I was a little wide-eyed kid, just having a blast with that. And the other thing that was fun for me is I got to drive before I was old enough to drive. Mm-hmm. So I would be out there on my one of my dad's retired race cars with he had these Chrysler 300s that he had raced, and when they got tired and old, he would put these compound big slick tires on wide base wheels, no tread, and the whole job was to drive nice and slow around the perimeter and just compact the road.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I learned to drift.
Before drifting was cool.
Before drifting was cool. But you had a Chrysler 300 with a 400 horsepower engine in it. In those days, that was big power. Kick it sideways, and I only did it on the corners. I never did it on the straights. But I would.
Yeah.
My dad could never figure out why the corners were never as firm as the main straightaways. But I had a lot of fun with that. And
Yeah.
We'd like to thank our first sponsor of the podcast, Adam Serafine, and he has put together a development in Osage Beach, Missouri called Harper's Cove. Myrick, tell us about that.
Yeah, so we actually went over and checked it out the other day. Lots of waterfront lots, a pool house, big, large dock, community dock that, we'll be able to have a lot of boats down there. And I feel that it's going to be a lot of power boaters that fill this place up, because the people that I've hear that are building houses there are all power boaters. So to me, it kind of gives it that guy that wants to have a because there are a lot of lots that are second tier also, but it's that guy that wants to have the lack of maintenance, like a condo kind of feel. Come in, just enjoy your time there, go boating, and leave. And that's what I feel that this property is really doing. I know that there's Rusty's building a house there, which, him being, a really good salesman and a really good taker care of his customers.
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be, and I think there already is. I just don't know off the top of my head names of customers that are building houses in there that are power boaters that are gonna, basically fill those docks up with badass boats. And then, being really close to Osage Beach on Case Road, and then being really close to, where the shootout's going to be, being really close to Performance Boat Center. And that's pretty much the beauty of the logistics of that place. And if you were to go there by water, you go back in the cove past Kellysport, which is a no-wake cove. So those people that want to leave their boat in a slip and not worried about it getting rocked all over the place, even if you don't have a lift, that'll be able to happen. So that's what I mean. I live in a small little cove, nothing like the size they're talking about, but the fact that it's no wake is huge on Lake of the Ozarks, because your friends can come over and tie up their boats to your dock and not worrying about a 55 Sea Ray going by and putting it on top of the dock if it isn't positioned correctly. And I know there's a lot of docks that way around the lake, but you definitely don't run into that issue here at Harper's Cove. And and I really appreciate getting some sponsorship from Harper's Cove.
Yep. Thanks, Adam.
When he died, he had one of his original stock cars in the garage, but it was kind of messed up. It was co-owned partly through a business, partly through a trust. It was just complicated. The only way out of it clean was to sell it. But I let it go because I couldn't figure out how to keep it, and I didn't have a place to keep it back then. Plus, I was broke after putting myself through grad school, so I didn't have much in the way of earnings. I had a lot at the time I finished high school. I had put away enough money to pay. I let my dad pay for my undergrad education, but so I felt because I left him, I felt I was obligated to pay for my own graduate school. So I did. And I burned up everything I earned working at Lake X. But it was a good learning experience, and I got some really good education, technical education down there, because I had first class mechanics teaching me how to set up a boat. I had his pilot taught me how to paint. So I took my motorcycles apart and painted everything up all custom. And I wouldn't have learned any of those things but for that opportunity at Lake X. And it wasn't a career choice, but it taught me an awful lot about practical engineering. And I got to set up snowmobiles and, do a lot of the sound control testing in the early 70s.
So the Kiekhaefers have always been around. You guys have always been around power sports.
Yeah.
So, I always like to say, knower of all, master of none, because they're like, how do you know how to do that? I'm like, watch somebody. I helped on a project. How do you know how to lay fiberglass? Well, have you ever watched somebody do it? It's like, that's how you do it. So, knower of all, master of none.
Fred, tell us how you circled back into the marine industry after you've completed your business school.
Well, right from business school, actually, I was still in business school, and my father had to have heart surgery. He had some blockage. I had to do stents in the vessels feeding the heart. So he was very, very open with me about what he was going to go through, and he said, "Please come back and run Kiekhaefer Aero Marine, and then when I recover." We'll transfer the company to you, and you'll have a lot of nice things said. So I did. I switched into the night program at Northwestern, took the course. I only had 4 courses left to graduate, so I switched into the night program and finished them up with 3 visits a week from Fond du Lac down to Lake Forest area where the college was, and I ran the company during the day. And it was kind of handy because I was learning things in school that I could apply immediately at Kiekhaefer Aero Marine. And my dad's company had been losing money because he was spending it faster than he was making it, especially on race engines. And I got up there and I basically turned the company around while he was recovering. My gratitude for that was to be told I couldn't acquire the company. And I had tried to make the purchase. I had a legal team. He had a legal team, and he read a very uncomplimentary letter read by his lawyer. And I just turned to my attorneys and said, "Send me a final bill. This isn't going to happen." And I left. Wow. I left for good. I went to work. I went to work for Fisher Imaging, which was a medical diagnostic equipment company. They made primarily veterinary X-ray equipment, so tables, bucky stands to limit exposure, and I was their manufacturing manager for new products. So I went there. I spent 2 years there. They brought in a crusty old bastard to head up their whole manufacturing operation, and 4 of us quit. The guy was impossible to work for. So my girlfriend at that time, who's now my wife, had just finished medical school and was in residency and had been accepted to Harvard. So I thought, well, I better find a job in Boston. So I quit Fisher Imaging and I went out and interviewed with a bunch of companies in the Boston area. I wasn't having a whole lot of luck. And finally I went and knocked on the door at Price Waterhouse because I had decided that consulting would be a good use of what I had learned. And I enjoyed the prospect of being respected for my opinions instead of rejected with them. And I was rejected by Price Waterhouse. And I thought, oh, shit, that's no good. But one of the guys I had worked with at Fisher was hired by Price Waterhouse in Chicago. And then one of the partners in charge in Chicago said, who do you know that we should hire? Well, you ought to get Fred. He's really good. So the Boston partner got a call from the Chicago partner, said, oh, this guy, Fred Kiekhaefer, you ought to hire him. And the guy said, oh, shit, we just sent him a rejection letter.
Funny how that stuff works.
So I got a phone call, and they invited me back in for another interview, and they hired me, and I worked at Price Waterhouse. One of the engagements, I really had a blast there. They were very, very big on mentoring, and they were very, very big on continuing education, bringing you up to speed with the latest. So the first week I was there, they put me in a week-long school. Second week I was there, they put me with a mentor who was taking me around, introducing him to his clients. 2 of which I had written letters to and been rejected by. And one of them says, the problem we have here is we just can't find guys like you. And he pointed right at me. I said, if you read your damn mail, you would have had a chance. But at any rate, it was a great time. And in one of the engagements that I was on was setting up an Islamic bank in Geneva, Switzerland. So I was working in Geneva for a partner in the New York office who brought me in because I had really good skills with manual purchase order systems. Part of the manufacturing process is, of course, procurement. And they because I had done some small clients that had little businesses, a lot of manual systems, they were trying to figure out how to account for money that, folks would come in out of the desert with bags of money and try to figure out how to do it with a bank and under the Quran, interest was illegal, immoral. You can't collect interest. So you had to have partnerships. So I set up that whole system for them as part of a bigger project, but it was just fascinating to deal with it. And the partner I worked for on that engagement was in Paris. He transferred to Chicago and brought me from Boston to Chicago at the same time my wife went from Harvard to Northwestern. So it worked out really well that way.
Nice.
But 2 weeks after I was there, my father passed away. And I got a phone call
what were your thoughts when he died?
Well, when I got back to Chicago, I made a couple of visits up to Fond du Lac and, tried to mend fences with my dad because I knew he was having trouble. And, he was still mad that I had left him and still mad that I was successful and I'd never come back to a town like Fond du Lac, having been in Boston and Chicago and Switzerland. And, he was really, it was kind of odd. I think he was proud and pissed at the same time. But I went up there and did my best to mend the fences a little bit. Quite frankly, he had actually told the woman that's now my wife that she could do better than me. She should leave me. And thanks, Dad.
Thanks, Dad.
But fortunately, that's one time she didn't listen, and I followed her to Chicago. And then when my dad passed, I was a little bit conflicted. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I got a phone call from one of the fellows that was on his board and said, "I know you always wanted to run this business." He said, if you're still interested in doing that, you better act fast, because the trustees of my father's estate were about to give it to a couple of people that worked for him. So I got in middle of all of that, and I got these two people to agree to be minority shareholders, and I would be the majority shareholder. Then the trustees, they forced me to take them at a much larger percentage than they had already agreed to. So we ended up 50, 25, 25 instead of 95 and 5. Wow. That's okay. I figured I don't need either one of their skills. One was a finance guy. The other one was my dad's admin. And she didn't really have any useful skills that I needed. So I put her into public relations. So when she would write something talking about what we were doing, and then it would force me to rewrite it. But it was a good motivator that way because she did not have the talent. But she was at least harmless. The finance guy was a problem, and I ended up having to fire him. He was an alcoholic, and he was mean. If I'd go to a boat race or someplace, to market products, go to a dealer meeting or something like that, I'd come back, there'd be a line of people down the hall.
Yeah.
This is what he did while you were away. Yep. Lots of people that complain. It was bad.
Wow.
But that's how I ended up. I dropped the motors part out of it and just called it Kiekhaefer Marine.
So did you acquire his 25% and then the other lady?
No, he well, yes, we bought his 25% and we rewrote the agreement that she would have equal to me in terms of buy-sell requirements. We didn't want her to be disadvantaged by standing with me. She agreed with me that he needed to go. So we ended up negotiating that she would still have an equal say to me, even though we proportioned his shares out. So it was an equitable deal. She was harmless, and he was a detriment.
Yeah.
He was a CFO, and I had to teach him how to set up a chart of accounts because he didn't understand management accounting versus bookkeeping. So he was trouble right from the beginning, but I tried to neutralize him as best I could. My philosophy, better half of something good than 100% of nothing or 0% of nothing. So
Right.
I really worked hard to try to make it functional, but finally I had to undo that part of it. And we had, at that point, we were making relatively minor componentry. We made propellers and throttle controls and trim tabs and what I nicknamed the trinkets and trash of the performance industry. I mean, they were good products, but they were relatively insignificant. I mean, yeah, the props were important. They wouldn't go anywhere without them. The trim tabs were pretty important, especially those days on the V-bottom race boats. You needed them to get the boats on plane when they were fully fueled for a race. But we took the race products into the recreational world, and that's really what built the volume. And then we were also making heavy duty components for inside of the Mercury drives. So the Mercruiser 3 and 3A, they were still they were designed for 300 horsepower, and people were trying to push 800 to 1,000 horsepower through them, and they were going off like hand grenades. So one of the things my father had done after I left and before I came back, before he passed away, he had been making heavier duty internal components to upgrade and they actually made a complete lower just because they couldn't keep the gears in the Mercruiser 3. So we had those products, and I had a customer in Europe that asked me, "Why are you making things to make the Mercury? Why don't you design a sterndrive?" Well, money is one reason. It was an expensive process. Engineering depth was another. At that time, we didn't have as deep a bench in engineering as we would have had to have. But a lucky thing had happened to me when I was in Europe with Price Waterhouse. A friend that had previously worked for me at Aeromarine was now working for BMW in Munich. And that was Larry Losey. Larry passed a year back, but Larry at that time was working for BMW, and BMW was looking at getting in a big way to the marine industry. They had the engines, they didn't have a drive. Larry wanted me to talk to the BMW management team about getting BMW into the marine industry with a sterndrive product. Larry was the engineer. I had the business background. So I met with him in Munich, and we had a pretty interesting conversation. It was me and 6 of their directors and Larry. That was it. And I said, "What would it take to get in?" I said, let me think about what you'd have to do. I said, "First of all, you got an uphill fight because you got Mercruiser, who was at that time 65, 70% market share in the sterndrive world." So I went back, did some back of the envelope noodling and said, "This is what it's going to take you in staffing. This is what's going to cost you to tool it. This is how long you're going to lose money before you turn the corner. And at that, you got an uphill fight because you're coming in at 0 against 70% market share. So you better damn well be committed to the industry, because I've twice in my life had to cut production staff by hundreds of people. I said, I'm not going to do it a third time. So if you're not in it for 3 years at a loss before you turn the corner, don't start." They went off, had a meeting, came back in. "You're very good. That was the best presentation we've ever had. You're right. We're not going to start."
Yeah.
So I hired Larry when I got
the reason there's no BMW sterndrive.
Yeah. Well, there actually was briefly. But
Really?
Larry was in the process of redesigning a new drive for them, and actually was very far along in the project when he brought me in to talk to him.
Wow.
So, I ended up with that turnover at Price Waterhouse, going to Chicago, and then going up to Aero Marine. And as soon as I got there, we were working on things, just trying to turn it around, because I bought assets because the company was unprofitable and had lost a lot of money. My father essentially peed away everything he had earned in his lifetime, and his final years were kind of sad that way, because he had assets, but he didn't have liquidity. And so, he struggled to make payroll. He struggled to pay for tooling. We had vendors cutting us off because he didn't have the money to pay the bills. It was really a very sad lesson for me. But I learned from that I was never going to be in that position. So when I bought it, the first thing I did was pull everybody together and say, what do you do that is really dumb? What should we be changing? Because we can't continue to lose money. I figure I got maybe 6 weeks, 3 months at the outside, unless I can find financing, and they're not going to finance a business that's losing money. So what are we doing that's stupid? What are we doing that's not stupid that we should do more of? And what came out of that, and this was all hands, everybody in the whole plant, engineers, shop workers, admin people, everybody. And the feedback I got was, we're losing money on every race engine we sell. We should stop. We could do more with trim tabs, but we got to make them so they live on recreational boats, because they were race boats. They come out of the water, everything gets washed down. You put it in a recreational boat, it's going to sit in a marina. It's going to have hot marinas that are going to corrode everything to pieces. So what we did was we started using bonding straps. We started putting sacrificial anodes. We improved the quality of the paint. And then that kind of stuff, just to raise the quality of the products we were already making. And then we made recreational propellers, not just racing propellers, picked away at that. And we actually became profitable in the first 2 months.
Wow.
So, and I look back on it and I said, there's no way in hell that should have been possible. But it was the team that worked together to make it happen.
What year was that?
That would have been 1983.
Nice.
So we were off and running. And then when this customer in Europe said, why are you making gears? Why don't you do a drive? That's when I brought Larry back from BMW, because he was working part-time in Montvale, New Jersey, where their U.S. offices were, and part-time in Munich, where the European office. And he said, I don't have a reason to be here if they're not going to do the marine stuff. So I hired him. And the K-drive, my dad had already prototyped the what he called a K-drive, and it was he did a race version and but he never produced it. He made, I think, 3 sets that he sold, but they had a gear case that pivoted like Mercury does now in their 12-cylinder. He did that with a couple of push cylinders on a gear case, because at that time there was still the universal joint mechanism that let it tilt and steer was a patent that was jointly agreed between Volvo and Mercruiser, and that patent was still active. So my dad designed that drive, or Larry actually did. Larry designed that drive to get around the patent. When I looked at it, there were limitations in the geometry of that drive to be because it was already prototyped and tooled. We could have started that right away. But I looked at it and said, that's not right. The prop's too close to the transom. The gear case is too big. So we had a little sneaky little program we put together where we went to boat races. And every time we found a boat that was running really well, we measured how far was the propeller back and how high up was it. And we put a dot on a board, transom corner, bottom corner, and then we measured back and put a dot on the board. The next boat race, we'd go find 2 or 3 that were running really well, and we'd put 3 more dots on the board. Turns out they were all in about a 5.5, 6-inch circle on their little piece of Mylar. So we picked the center, and that's where we decided the propeller was going to be. And then we developed the rest of the drive around it. And that was the Kiekhaefer drive. It was, hey, they're learning something. And they were set back farther than we would have ever done if we'd have used the original K drive. So that was real good. And then I found this customer that recommended it. He was going to fund it, and we were going to do it in 3 progress payments, and based on milestones in the engineering and development of the drive. We got to the first milestone, we couldn't find him. Don't know what happened. Don't know. I know where his money came from, because he had a composites business, and he had sold it to BMW, and that's where his money came from. So he was going to be a big time boat racer, and we gave him distribution rights for Europe, and we would do Americas and Asia Pacific. And when we couldn't find him, we were in a panic because we'd already spent a lot of money. And I went to my banker and said, "My guys want to continue. Can you fund this development?" And they agreed they would. So we continued and prototyped that drive. Went through 10 engines and 20 transmissions, 1,000 horsepower, to get 200 hours on the drive. I said, "Larry, this is going to be painful if we don't get some good engines." He goes, "Yeah, but look at the bright side. We have a drive that eats engines instead of the other way around." Larry had a great sense of humor, and he was right. We did, but we finally got 200 hours, and we went to the Miami Boat Show in 1988, and we had private showings because we could identify all the potential customers. We had private showings in the Marriott Biscayne Bay, invitation only. And the deal was, if you like it and you want it, sign up today, give us half the money in 2 weeks after the show, and the balance before we ship it to you. And we sold out 9 months of production in 2 days.
Wow.
That was the start. One of those customers was Tom Gentry. And Tom Gentry took the Mercruisers out of his boat, put these in, triple Gentry turbos running through 3 of these drives. And he leased that boat to Don Johnson for the 1988 Superboat World Cup. And Johnson won it. So we had our first world championship under our belts. Next year, Peter Markey did a repeat.
Did the guy with the composites ever show back up? The guy who made his money with the... Never saw him again.
Never saw him again. And you got to wonder, I mean, maybe the guy was a bad guy, and maybe somebody put him in the bottom of the med. I mean, you don't know. Our industry was full of those kind of people. So you don't know. You don't know. So anyway, we did okay. And we had 2 consecutive worlds, and then I was at the National Marine Manufacturers. They had an annual meet. This one was in Bermuda, and I got a tap on the shoulder, and it was a couple of Brunswick strategy guys that said, "We'd like to acquire your company."
Oh, wow. And this was about 1990.
Yep, just before right, late '89, early '90, and we had watched the volume of our industry declining in the late 1980s, and I was starting to get really concerned because I had personally guaranteed all the bank debt that had funded the development of that drive. So I was hanging out there with a big nut and personally guaranteed, and starting to get nervous because the volume was starting to fall off. So mentally, I was prepared to take an offer. So I went out, so here comes the Brunswick guy. So, well, let me see who else might be interested. So I talked to Outboard Marine. I talked to Yamaha. I talked to Volvo. And Yamaha, they couldn't figure out what they would do with it. Even though they were working on a drive, they couldn't figure out why they would need something like that. Outboard Marine wanted us to just private label it. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And Volvo was seriously interested, and we had some really good meetings. And every time they sent somebody to Fond du Lac, the airport would tell the Mercury guys, "The Volvo guys are back," which actually worked to my advantage. And Brunswick was very good. They were very thorough. They would put a contract together. The Volvo's guys would put a letter of understanding. So just not the same level of detail. And the Volvo offer was actually better, but I wasn't sure it was real. And the Brunswick guys every time. All I had to do was sign it. We were done. And so I ended up, obviously, joining Mercury. And it was a kind of an interesting dilemma for me because I had to bury a lot of baggage because, my dad had had a very rough time and Brunswick had treated him terribly. So I knew I was going to have to ignore that and talk about the good things and not the bad things to make it successful. So I arrived, and that was Mercury Performance Products back then. We changed the name right away to Mercury Racing.
This podcast is powered by Speedboat Magazine. Subscribe now at speedboat.com for 9 power-packed current issues a year direct to your mailbox.